Welcome once again to the Talking Archive. I'm Josh Jacobs. By the way, check us out on our website. You can follow us on Instagram at JoshDJ57. Also, be sure to follow us, actually like us, and subscribe to us here on YouTube. That's subscribe, not like. That's the other websites. But yeah, it's great to have with us today a gentleman who grew up in Southern California, and his entire radio career has been in SoCal, a rarity of sorts. It's a privilege to be talking with Bill Wright. Thanks for coming on today.
Well, it's a pleasure. Thank you, Josh.
Well, tell us about growing up in Southern California and the events leading to you getting into radio and voiceover.
You know, having listened to some of your previous interviews, I'm starting to suspect that radio people may have had their DNA seeded by aliens or something because of the commonalities. And, hear about our first memories were how cool records were in music and stereos and speakers and microphones. And then as we grew up, we couldn't even imagine ourselves doing anything but radio broadcasting of some sort. And even if people told you you're going to end up having lived in every state of the union and you'll probably be broke, we'd say we are undeterred. It's all I can do. So I grew up in the 60s largely when I was in grammar school, and it was kind of a golden age of radio in Los Angeles. We had KFWB. Even before it was a news station, it was Top 40, and then KRLA, and of course the great KHJ Boss Radio.
Oh yeah.
And I was always just fascinated with everything from the music to the jingles and the positioning of the spots. Everything was fascinating to me. And I just thought, wow, this is just the coolest thing. And one of the jocks at KHJ was the overnight guy. His name was Johnny Williams.
Oh yeah.
And at that hour of the night, I guess they didn't have anyone to answer the phone, so he answered his own phones. So I would, wait till he'd come on at midnight, and at, 12:30, I'd be talking to him. And I was like, 10 years old. My squeaky little voice. I said, "What do I have to do to get into radio?" And he said, "Well, first of all, it might help if your voice changes." And but he was very nice, and I just never forgot about it. So there really wasn't any question about it. And then when I got to high school in 1968, went to a private boarding school, and they had a radio station that a former graduate had bequeathed to the place. I guess he was an engineer that designed his own board. It was a homemade board, a couple of turntables, an ancient cart machine, an old Magnacorder reel-to-reel. And kind of learned the ropes just from the upperclassmen. This was 1968. It was a great time for music, Josh.
Oh, yeah.
The Beatles and the Stones and the Who had already established themselves. It was a year where the Doors were already an ongoing concern. You had Led Zeppelin just getting going, Jethro Tull, and the music just absolutely, I just loved it. Concurrently at that time, FM radio was kind of coming into being. Now, at that time, it was, you might say, the redheaded stepchild of radio. People didn't think too much of it, although the audio quality, obviously was much better. You could do stereo at that time. And a man by the name of Tom Donahue was making waves up in San Francisco at a station called KMPX, and then came down here, and the Pasadena Presbyterian Church happened to have an AM-FM combo called KPPC, and they had an FM at 106.7, which is now occupied by K-Rock, and they were not allowed, the church was not allowed to simulcast their religious services and whatnot any more than 25% of the time. That was the rule. So they needed to fill programming space, and Tom came down and said, why don't you lease the space to us? And they did, and that was one of the first really underground stations, as they called it. He was the father of underground. KMET was still around already at the time, KLOS, which was, I think, KABC-FM.
That's right, yeah.
Yeah, and I was just really taken with the whole FM phenomenon. It was, you'd call it the anti-radio in the sense that it was not formatted very tightly, very free form, and the jocks chose their own music. And I thought, well, this is the way to go. And you could hear half-hour sets without even knowing what station you were listening to. But that's the direction that I ended up going into, and actually kind of embraced, still loving, what AM radio had to offer. But I just thought, I'm probably going to be more of an FM broadcaster. So that's what happened with me.
It's interesting you mentioned that, because Big Day Tom Donahue was definitely the town crier here on the West Coast. On the East Coast was a guy named Roscoe, who even was in L.A. for a little bit, but he was mainly in New York, doing the same thing out there. At Monterey Pop Festival, because Tom Donahue as well as B. Mitchell Reed used to be top 40 DJs.
Right.
Tom Donahue was on KYA, which I did an interview with Gary Mora, who's running KYA Online, a recreation of it, which Tom Donahue was on through much of the 60s with 400 pounds of solid sounds, as one of the advertisements said, because of his big stature. And I actually met Tom's widow, Rachel, many years ago. She was friendly. And the cool thing about this whole FM phenomenon, my dad used to have us listening to like KMET as well as KNX-FM and K-West 106, which came along later. And my dad said, now, Josh, AM is in mono, has lots of commercials. FM's in stereo and has very few commercials.
Yes.
And that was something I never forgot as a little kid.
Yeah.
And because it was like, AM was like staticky and FM was just so crystal clear, and getting to hear those great rock artists was just something to behold. Now, at the radio station in your high school, how much free form did you get to do?
Well, pretty much anything you wanted to do. I recall that when I got there, it was just when the Beatles' White Album came out. And the totally great thing is the station was under the umbrella of IBS, I think it's the Intercollegiate Broadcasting System. And as such, we actually got record service from a lot of the major record companies, including Apple Records, and we actually got these albums a couple of weeks before they were released to the stores.
Wow.
So I recall that, the manager, an upperclassman at the time, he said, we got this White Album, and you can tune in tonight. And I think we must have played that thing about 500 times in the first couple of weeks, and I'm afraid that you started to hear a lot of pops and crackles because this was the vinyl era. And but that's one thing I remember. I also remember the music coming in, and I got this album in, and it had this big dirigible on it. And what do you know? It was the first Led Zeppelin album. And I was familiar with Jimmy Page, who was with the Yardbirds at the time, and I put that thing on, and I just died and went to heaven. And to this day, that's probably one of my favorite albums of all time. I mean, John Paul Jones on the keyboards, and it's just phenomenal. And so I remember, I played that. I played Johnny Kaye and the Sparrows, Steppenwolf. I think we had quite a lot of freedom. What we did try to do is we ran fake spots. They got some 7-Up commercials and a few other things so that we could get the rhythm of actually doing radio. And we learned how to queue up records and keep logs, and we tried to do it on the up and up. But it was not a licensed station. Now, it too was an AM/FM, but a little caveat here. The AM was what was called carrier current. That meant that you sort of plugged it into the power system of the buildings, and that, you could, if you plugged your clock radio in at that time, you'd get the station at, I think it was 5:40 AM. And we had an FM, a low-power FM, which was driven by this really big old Gates transmitter, which I'm convinced was probably not tuned very well and probably throwing off harmonics. Who knows how far? But we didn't get caught. One interesting thing that played into the future is the manager was an upperclassman, and he was kind of a practical joker. They liked to haze the underclassmen. So as a freshman, at the end of the year, he said, next year the station's going to get an FCC license, so you've got to go and get one too. And I believed him. So I called in. I got the material for a third-class license, studied for it, asked my parents to take me downtown where the FCC office was at the time. I took that test, I passed it, and when I got back for my sophomore year, he was laughing at me, saying, the joke's on you. And I said to him, no, the joke's on you, because I really enjoyed doing this. And later on, that was the difference between me getting paid in my first job and not getting paid. So it was really, I have to thank the man.
Did you buy him dinner saying thank you very much for all this good vibe?
Yes, well, as a matter of fact, I saw him years later where this school hosted an IBS conference, and they invited me as a guest speaker, and this guy, Larry, was there, and I told him, I owe a good deal of my career to you because you're such a good BSer, and the best thing I ever did was take you seriously, and he got a kick out of it. He thought that was great.
What line of work did Larry go into, by the way?
His family owned a hardware store in, I think it was Arizona, but I think he went into some sort of engineering. I know he was on the board of directors of the school later on, and he didn't keep going in radio, but he remembered it fondly, and we had a good time reminiscing.
Now, after high school, in high school, I guess, there were a lot of local bands that played throughout the area. I mean, my parents were from Chicago. My mom remembers seeing the Shadows of Night, who had the hit with Gloria in America, while Van Morrison had it, in the UK with his group Them. She also saw New Colony 6, the Buckinghams, and there's some other groups that I'm slipping right now. But then, in Southern California, you had a lot of great groups there, like Buffalo Springfield. I think Love was from Southern California, if I'm not mistaken. So
Arthur
too, the
Lee,
Birds, the Turtles. Did any of those rock musicians ever visit the high school radio station?
No, they didn't visit the high school radio station because we were, as I say, not licensed, so it was not outside of getting great record service, which I guess was you didn't have to be licensed. We didn't do that, but we did have some cool bands come around. Claremont, which is in the Pomona Walnut Valley. There was Bridges Auditorium, which was a kind of nice venue, very small and intimate. And I recall that Procol Harum played there. And unfortunately, I couldn't get off campus to go, but I in retrospect, they were one of my very favorite bands, still are, really.
Oh, yeah.
And I can only imagine lots of people came. It wasn't really till college and our college radio that, we got to get some people to come around. I had a good friend who kind of ran the budget. They let the students do it. Mm-hmm. So he had this money available, and his musical taste was similar to mine, and said, well, what would you think if we got Chick Corea and returned to Forever? I said, I like the idea. And
wow.
So they came, and the Mahavishnu Orchestra was another, getting into some of the, fusion type stuff. Mm-hmm. We had the Marshall Tucker Band. We had, Jimmy Buffett.
Wow.
Jimmy Buffett opened for the Marshall Tucker Band, and the college station, I was on the air at the time, and they said, so the opening act, who was not very well known at the time, would like to come over, and would you like to interview him? I said, sure, why not? He comes in, nicest guy, Jimmy Buffett, and he brought his guitar with him, and he did a little rendition of, are you ready? Why don't we get drunk and screw? Which, for college students is about all we were interested in
yeah.
at the time.
Alice Cooper.
This guy's going to be okay. And he did a great show, and the Marshall Tucker Band was great. They did it outdoors, And that was about 1974, 75, somewhere in there.
Yeah, in fact, I remember the Marshall Tucker Band. They're still around today, and a childhood friend of mine actually got to meet Jimmy Buffett when she was a little kid, and she posted a picture of herself and her dad and Jimmy from when she was little. I was like, oh my goodness, I didn't know that she got to meet Jimmy Buffett.
Yeah.
And he was still the same great guy years later. There was not this ego or this narcissism that oftentimes can take over if you become a big name. He was still the same down-to-earth guy that he was back then.
Yeah, and we lost him too early. You know, what was it, last year or the year before?
Yeah.
I was really heartbroken.
I mean, and the even the songs he covered, like he did a great version of Brown Eyed Girl, getting back to Van Morrison, with that calypso sound. In fact, I DJ'd a friend's wedding about, I don't know, a dozen years ago, and it kind of reminded me. They didn't play Brown Eyed Girl because the bride had blue eyes, but that would have been funny if they did. But the music they did sounded so much like Jimmy Buffett. I was like, oh my goodness, I feel like I'm at a Jimmy Buffett concert except without Jimmy's vocals. But it was really cool. How was the Marshall Tucker Band? Did you get to talk with them too?
If I did, it would only have been backstage briefly. Jimmy came over to the station, and then, of course, you know, we went out with him to the concert and, you know, got to sort of stand backstage. And I'm sure it was kind of frenzied, so I don't have great recollection of anything past the time that he gave us on the air.
Yeah. And this was at UC San Diego, KSDT 98.3, which is now exclusively online. And that signal I read was pretty much just around the campus itself. You couldn't get it outside of the campus.
Well, that's another interesting story. You want to hear it?
Sure.
When I got there in 1972, it was an AM carrier current kind of deal. And so it played in the various dorms. And UCSD was much smaller back then. I think we had 5,000 students, including grad students. Today, I think there's 30 or 40,000. Wow. But the chief engineer at the time wanted to sort of expand that a little bit. So he said, tell you what, we were up, my roommate and I, on the 5th floor of one of the high-rise dorms. He said, what if we put the transmitter up in your room and we ran a wire between the two dorms, and I get a equalized phone line to get the audio up there, and let's see what happens there. And I said, sure. So the transmitter was under my roommate's bed, and you know, you could actually sort of hear, maybe it was just the RF, you could hear it in a very, quieted way. And it turns out that because we were on the bluffs overlooking the Pacific, this thing covered a lot of ground. So this was another illegal operation that might have gone 25 miles in all directions. So that's what that became. And then ultimately we added a feature, cable FM. So if you had cable TV, you could run a splitter from your TV to your receiver, and then we had a frequency that you could get if you did that. And surprisingly, a lot of people that kind of liked the fact that, again, freeform, you had a lot of different people presenting, their favorite music, and not just presenting their music, but in the right juxtaposition, so that you put together sets, kind of like Jim Ladd did his whole career, where it was more than just any one song. It was we'll paint a mosaic, a picture, and every set sort of had a thematic connection, or was just a lot of really good songs, one after the other. But we had a pretty good audience. If you ask how come we didn't actually have a real broadcast signal like UC Santa Barbara, for example, it's because we were down in that San Diego market. It was every last space was taken on the FM band, and some of it was from Mexico because we were very close to the border.
That's right, yeah.
Yeah, so that's the way we did it at the time, and then as you say now, in the age of streaming, they're exclusively online. I gave it a listen recently, and I was kind of not happy with what I heard. It was very loose. They really didn't apply any kind of professional broadcast formatics to it at all. We tried to do that with various sweepers and imaging and public service announcements that we ran in lieu of commercials. And, I guess people just think of it now as I'm just going to play some records, and they don't think of it so much as a career. A lot of us were looking to do it as a career because, again, what else could we do? We had alien DNA.
Exactly. This is the Talking Archive. I'm Josh Jacobs. We're talking with Bill Wright, radio personality as well as voiceover talent production director. And next time, Bill discusses how he got into public radio in Southern California.